Walking into Retirement, an unusual podcast about finding purpose, meaning, and balance after a busy working life, with David Ailing Smith and Peter Taylor. Exploring the emotional, psychological, and practical realities of modern retirement through a series of reflective conversations undertaken whilst walking scenic routes across the UK.
Hi, Daz.
Hello, Peter. How are you? Have you recovered from your last walk?
I've recovered from last walk, and as I sent you a photo, I took my good lady wife to go and look at the bottom of the path, and she declined to do the walk again with me because we happened to be in the same area at the weekends, and it was much busier, I will have to say, when we went
Yeah.
back. But no, I did enjoy the walk, and I feel recovered now.
I'm looking forward to that being posted because I thought it was fun. I mean, the topic was basically the joy of retirement. I felt we'd spent a lot of time talking about some of the challenges, and it was really nice to talk through all the possibilities of having a bit of time, having a bit of choice, and what that might allow for. So I hope that lands well with our listener.
I'm sure it will, and I think it was great because I think you felt very good with you felt very happy with that general topic, and because I was out of breath most of the time, I didn't have too much to say, so you managed to go through your list quite quickly, I feel.
I did. I felt it was one of our more successful podcasts, actually. But
But we move on. Don't we? We've got a guest today.
of course, and looking forward to talking to our guest. And perhaps to put this into context, as our listener will know, we're basically alternating the guests with our walks, and we've been looking at the different starting positions, I suppose, for retirement, or elder essence, as I will keep plugging. And we've talked about forced retirements, we've talked about challenges in retirements, we've talked about the joy of retirements, and today we want to talk to our guest about the possibility of returning to work after retirement. We know that work is a great pull for many of us that have enjoyed our working lives, and some of us stay in the retirement phase and others decide they want to go back. And so I'd like to introduce Dean. So Dean, so nice to have you on the call.
Thank you for having me, guys. It's a pleasure.
And just to share with our listener, Dean, Peter, and I have worked together in the past. But maybe you could introduce yourself, Dean, in terms of in broad terms, the role you had, and the fact you are, I believe, in retirement, but I think you are, I believe, thinking of coming out of retirement. So do you want to just talk us through, as an introduction, who you are and what you do?
Yeah, certainly. I don't know how I'd classify myself, to be honest, at this moment in time, but I enjoyed a career where I like your good self. So I've managed to sort of rise up the ranks over time, and ended up working with yourself, Daz, and Peter at a company called Dayforce in a fairly senior role. I was senior vice president for the Asia Pacific Services organization with a team of about 300 people, and as you can imagine, in Asia Pacific, quite a fair amount of travel around the world as well. And I've had a very enjoyable career, but I think it's fair to say the last 2 or 3 years of my working life got to be fairly taxing on my sort of mental health and my overall enjoyment of life, I guess. And I think COVID had a fair amount to do with it as well. I shortly after COVID kind of settled down a bit, we were all in a very fortunate position at Dayforce where we could work remotely or hybrid work or whatever we wanted to do. And I had a confluence at the time of my children sort of leaving home and heading off to university, and found myself with a big house in Sydney with just my wife and I. And we decided to relocate a couple of hours south of Sydney to a more of a lifestyle place to live. And then the knock-on effect of that was I started looking at my work, and the two things didn't really gel very well. And just so happened to had an opportunity to gracefully exit my position at the time. And at the ripe old age of 54 years old, I decided to take what I was calling at the time early retirement.
Yeah.
And that's kind of been the case for the last year. So I'll pause there, and that's sort of how we sit today.
Yeah. Well, no, I mean that. Thank you, Dan. And I was just reflecting, man, that pressure of the last couple of years of work, that was nothing to do with your new boss, was it?
No, no, I quite liked my new boss, actually.
Well, I think your story is a good one, and I think it's relatable for so many people. And how was that first year, Dean? I mean, I can reflect on the fact that you did a fantastic job in the region, and it was a brutal role in the sense that not only did you have all the challenges of a very diverse set of customers and partners and employees across multiple countries. You had to deal with multiple time zones, dealing with Europe, dealing with the US, and so you know you were on late night calls, early morning calls for a lot of that period, weren't you? Which I'm sure took its toll.
Yeah, absolutely right, Daz. I mean, yeah, it wasn't uncommon for me to be on a call, at midnight my time, and then on another call at 5 a.m. and just cramming in some sleep in between the different time zones. I've got to say the company was very generous in terms of its demands for me to get on those calls. But in that type of role, as you know, it's easy to kind of lose control, if you like, or even lose awareness of what's going on in the world if you don't turn up for certain calls.
Yeah.
So it's something which was, as you've pointed out, was certainly extremely taxing on my life. Fortunately, I've got a lovely wife who was very understanding, and funnily enough, she's recently started her own HR consulting business where she's doing a lot of HR work for companies around the world, and now she's living a taste of that life, and I'm supporting her. So
Ah,
it's interesting, but I think there were a combination of things that led me to my decision. One of them was that concept of never being able to switch off in a role like that, both
yeah.
in terms of even if you're not getting on the calls, you're lying in bed thinking about what's happening tomorrow. The pressure, and I'm one of these people, as hopefully you would have seen. I like to be adding value. I like to be looking after people. I'm a pretty empathetic person. I sincerely care about the people in the team. And I got to a point where I didn't think I was up for the job anymore, to be honest.
Yeah.
And that bothered me from a mental health perspective. Nothing serious, but it got me thinking, if I do this for another 5 years, I'm probably not going to be in such a good place. So
Yeah.
so I decided to pull the pin when I pulled it, basically.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's so interesting, isn't it? People like yourself and people who are very engaged with their roles, want to come onto this. When you stop, it's a huge difference. And of course, there's a lot of relief from that. I'm sure there's a lot of we talked on our walk, didn't we, Peter, about just that reduction of pressure when you
Yeah,
when
we did.
you get yourself into a situation where actually you realize the burden you've been carrying for so long. And I mean, I know this wasn't your case, Dean, but lots of people with high-powered jobs that work diligently, like you've described, are very vulnerable to burnout, in my opinion. And we've seen a lot of it in our industry where actually that sort of that work ethic, that wish to do well for those around you or your organization, just can lead to just expending more energy than you've got. And so it's not an unusual tale, I don't think, for senior individuals to run out of steam, if I could just describe it in that way. And so
No, absolutely. And I'd probably sorry to jump in there, Daz, but I would say that it's something that we should all be talking about more as well, which is one of the reasons I wanted to come on this podcast. I don't think we should be afraid to say I'm feeling that burnout. I need to, if your company's going to support you in a sabbatical or something like that to help, that's fantastic. In my case, I'd kind of done a sabbatical about 10 or 15 years ago. I'd done something a little bit different, and I'd come back again. And I thought this time I need to really, I am burnt out. And looking back on it, I was definitely burnt out without doubt. And this was the best option for me, I think.
yeah, well, I think well, I'm very interested, Dean, in how was that for you? How was that on the sort of the Monday after you stopped, and what was your growing realization over this last year of the wonderful things that allowed for, but perhaps the
Yeah.
nagging, the voice in your head about what you were missing about it. I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, we're a funny species, us human beings, because it wasn't long after I stopped. Obviously, there was absolute joy initially at not having to look at a calendar and not having to get on that late night call, and even the concept of not having to check 150 emails when I wake up in the morning, because of course I'm on the other side of the world where most of those emails originate, and that was my daily routine. And the joy at not having to do that initially lasted probably a week or two, and then there was this feeling of not being needed anymore, and a little bit of depression, if you like, that crept in of what's my purpose in life now. And I wasn't very well prepared for that, if I'm honest. I had a few different hobbies on the go. I enjoy a bit of fishing, and I had plenty I wanted to do, and I'd planned to take up some other activities when I had the time to do it. But I found myself actually a couple of weeks in watching an awful lot of YouTube videos and drinking a lot of cups of tea and trying to figure out what my routine was going to look like. And I would probably say that lasted about 3 months. And then once I got into a bit of a groove, I don't think I ever really found the right routine, but I got into a groove where I was accepting this, and it's okay. And, I had a lot of people around me saying, you've just retired at 54 years old. For God's sake, just enjoy yourself. Go and have a game of golf. Just do something. And I didn't really feel like doing too much, to be honest.
Were you craving a routine though? I mean, it's interesting, isn't it? Because we've reflected in the past, Daz, you and I, about work offers that structure, offers that routine, offers that, it's part of your life is just managed by other people effectively. So it's interesting you say the fact that in those early weeks and months, you were looking for that, almost looking for that routine.
Yeah, absolutely, Peter. In fact, I was very unprepared for what that looked like. I'd been thinking about this point in time for some time, but I was very unprepared. And I was really missing the routine of having to be somewhere at a certain point in time, even if it was to turn up for a fairly pointless Zoom call that I didn't really need to be at. There's that feeling we have where we want to be wanted, and we want to turn up on that call and have a bit of a chat with people. And the other, that touches on a big part of this was the disconnection of, I'm now living in this seaside town a couple of hours south of Sydney, beautiful place to live, very close to the beach. But I didn't have, apart from my wife, there wasn't really anyone around for me to talk to, because my life evolved around talking to work colleagues.
Can I just say, Dean, that was a bit harsh. I enjoyed our Zoom calls. I thought they were quite useful. It is interesting. I mean, you said a couple of things, the loss of routine, and you didn't say this, but let me say it for you, sort of a loneliness associated with not having your community, because you had a great reputation in our organization, Dean, for being a very high quality leader that people respected. And one of the reasons that worked, I think, is because you were very authentic and you cared. And so I'm sure the sort of your end of that emotion was that you probably got a lot of energy from those people, and you were very informed and educated by your team. And I have some insights into this myself. And when they go, you miss them, don't you?
Absolutely. No, and I appreciate the kind words. I was fortunate enough to enjoy a birthday a couple of weeks ago. And funnily enough, I got about 5 or 6 text messages from people on the day of my birthday that I used to work with a year ago, wishing me happy birthday. And it just put a smile on my face, because I haven't spoken to those people for months and months and months, but they're still there. It's just that routine and that lack of structure for you to have that regular connection.
And we heard that. It kind of reflects on the point Sally made about forced redundancy in her case, but that was one of the things she really worried about, because a huge amount of a social existence was work related, and that she felt disappeared. To her, I think it appeared to disappear rapidly. I don't think it's true. I know she's been in contact with a few people from work since, but it is that it's a huge part of our social life disappears over the horizon. It is.
And it's interesting, you said you sort of after 2 or 3 months, Dean, you got into a new routine, because I certainly noticed the fishing photographs dropped off a bit.
Yes,
I was amused and also delighted and very jealous about some of the catches you were sending to me, just teasing me slightly about the fact you were off fishing now. But that did slow down, and so what was that new routine like? Was it one of these hobbies or passions that you devoted yourself to?
Well, it's an interesting question, Daz. So I, without getting into the gory details, one of the reasons that I have been in a position to sort of give up work at what most people would say is a fairly early age is one, I've had a great career and I've had some nice jobs that paid me some money, but I've also had an interest in property for about 20 or so years, and property in Australia has done quite well. But my wife will be the first to tell you that when I'm bored, it typically results in me spending a lot of money on something. And so I went and bought a house in the same town that we were living in, with a view to us living in that house, but there was a certain amount of renovation work that needed to be done. So I've spent the last 6 months on the tools, renovating the house we're now in, and I have not had a minute to think about boredom or loneliness or disconnection or anything. I've just plowed myself into this project.
Yeah.
And that has kept me off the beach, not fishing, as you rightly point out. But I've been in a pretty happy place, because whilst most people might think that's the worst thing they could ever do, I actually enjoy the process, being on the tools for 8 or 10 hours a day and building stuff. And so that project, and we'll get into the next phase in a minute, I guess, but that project has now come to a point where it's done. And so now I'm sitting here again, like, okay, what do I do now?
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? So, there's a focus, a project, a passion, you put your energies into it. I'm sure it's beautiful, Dean, and that stops and you're restless again, aren't you? I can hear it in your voice. You're restless again.
Exactly.
You've got energy, you've got intelligence, got enthusiasm, curiosity. And so you're thinking to yourself, what do I do with all of this, all these gifts? And so you've thought about going back to work, have you? So how did that land on your shoulders?
So this opens up a sort of whole world of conversation, I guess, about where I'm at. So I'm a year in, and as a side note, I've just had some pretty major surgery, where I've had a bilateral knee replacement.
Ooh,
so,
ouch.
So the projects that I alluded to ended sort of 3 days before I went into hospital to have this surgery. I was on a timeline. I got it done. I've had this surgery. I'm now 6 weeks post-op, and I'm feeling okay, and I'm on the right path to recovery, and I'm walking and riding a bike, and I've got a little way to go, but I'm doing okay. But I've been sitting around for a few months in parallel to this, just looking on. We have a job site called Seek, and I thought to myself, if I'm going to go back to a job, one thing I want to be clear about is I'm not going to go back to the same job I had, or a job very similar to what I had, because I've moved away from that for reasons that haven't changed. But if I did go back to work, what would I want to do? So I've been kind of browsing this catalogue of opportunities, and this is a ridiculous coincidence, but tomorrow I have my first day in what you might call a new job. And
congratulations.
Thank you. And this is something I found by just browsing around, curious as to what might, tick my boxes. And this particular role is similar to something I was doing when I was volunteering, whilst I was working at Dayforce. Actually, I had a couple of hours a week where I was volunteering at the local high school, working with kids that are about to leave school, talking about career options and those types of things, and really like an unofficial counsellor, if you like, to high school kids. And this role that I'm starting tomorrow is actually a similar role, where it's to do with high school kids and helping them focus in on what they might want to do in their next steps after high school, be it an apprenticeship, be it university, or most often go out into the workforce, and what you might want to do. But there's an edge to this, which is they have some technology which is built on a virtual reality platform. where the kids sit in a classroom and they put on a virtual reality headset and they visualize what it might look like to be a nurse or an electrician or whatever. And so when I looked at this, I thought to myself, well, this is kind of everything that I would want to do. It's giving back. It's altruistic. It's doing something that I know I enjoy, which I did when I was volunteering, working with kids and helping them sort of advance in life to the next step. But it's also got a technology flavor, which is relevant and a bit different and gives them a bit of an edge in their story. So the bottom line is I was one of 50 applicants, and I was certainly the oldest. The guy that's leaving the position right now is 23 years old, and during the interview process, I know there was a lot of question marks over my longevity or sustainability or energy in this role, and especially my technical skills, which I had to overcome. But at the end of the day, there were 50 applicants, and I somehow got the job. And I start my first day tomorrow, which is a bit of an induction. And then on Friday, I'm at a high school in a suburb of Sydney doing my first facilitation with a classroom full of kids. So
that is
check in with me
fantastic.
next week and we'll see how it goes.
Exciting.
And it's so, I mean, Dean, I'm guessing, given this is an education situation, this is nothing to do with money. This is entirely to do with using your expertise, applying your passions, as you say, giving something back. And so this return to work for you is to do with purpose, isn't it? It's not to do with money. Absolutely.
And I'm so glad you reminded me, because I wanted to touch on that. That was kind of where I was going to start, is that I've thought a little bit about this, and it seems quite obvious, but to any listeners that are sort of earlier in their career, when we go looking for a job, when I went looking for a job 20 years ago, I may have been, at a midway point in my career, but the number one factor in me looking at that job and being remotely interested in taking that job was money.
Mm-hmm.
And is it going to pay more money than I'm currently on? Mm-hmm. And then the next question is, have I got the skills to do it? And will I, if I go for it, you think I might get it? But it was always driven around that money aspect. And one of the things that, if you make the choice to retire, typically the assumption is you can afford to retire. That may not always be the case. And I'll come back to that point in a minute, because I think that's an important point. But in my case, you're absolutely right, Daz. If I wanted a job that paid me a lot of money, I don't think I would find a job better than the one I had, to be honest. This was more about, okay, what do I want to do? And if I'm going to do something other than sit on the sofa and watch YouTube videos all day, if I'm going to give back to society and be a sort of valued member of the community, then where can I apply my skills for the most return on that investment? And that's kind of where I landed.
Yeah, and it's so interesting. One of our sort of subtexts to doing this work together, Peter and I, which has been a project of mine, being recently retired, is what can retirement teach us about work? And I think and you sort of said it then. There's been a shift in the way you choose your work, and I'm doing a bit of work with some folks at the moment who are looking for the next opportunity, and it's so interesting. Obviously, everyone needs money, and you've got to have enough money to sustain yourself and your family. But put that to one side for a moment. It is all about values, isn't it? And about speaking to your passions, and that's what makes work sustainable and enjoyable, and how you grow as an individual. And one of the sort of subtexts of these chats is, I'm a real great advocate of saying that retirement is not the end of things, it's the start of things. Whereas you have an opportunity to reinvent yourself or reapply yourself, or make a difference in a way that perhaps wasn't quite what happened when you were working for somebody else. So it's so interesting to hear your story, Dean, and sort of you're confirming the fact that actually you've got a whole new chapter in front of you, and I hope it goes on for a very long time. And not only I'm sure you'll be happy, but you're going to influence the next generation, and isn't that fantastic?
No, absolutely. And the other aspect of that is I'm in a position for probably the first time in my life where I can go out and do something that I want to do without it necessarily being paying the most money. And if it turns out that after a year or two I'm not enjoying it, then I'll certainly be able to say, well, at least I gave that a go, and I've had a go at doing something a little bit different. It didn't work out, but I certainly haven't wasted any time, put it that way.
Absolutely. I mean, every interaction you have, from Friday onwards, which has lands positively with one of the younger generation, what a massively good use of your time, I would say, Dean.
Exactly.
Yeah. Were you surprised, Dean, that you wanted to go back to work? Had you anticipated that when you left?
I think I always left the door open for something like this. There's a huge sort of lift in morale just to know that you can actually go out and apply for a job like this and get it, to be honest.
Yeah.
It gave me a huge lift when I was informed that I'd got the job. I think I always thought a year ago, I'll see how this doing nothing business goes, and if I'm not enjoying myself, then someone actually said to me at Dayforce, one of the sales representatives actually at Dayforce on my last day said, I don't know what you're worried about, because if you get bored, you can always go and get a job where someone's paying you money to do something. Go and work behind a bar in the local social club or something like that, where you can go and talk to people. And I thought, yeah, that's probably an interesting way of putting it. There's always jobs out there that will meet the needs of people and what they're looking for. It's just, I would say, just don't rush into it and take your time and find something that fits the bill.
Quite so, and also, what is it that fits the bill? That is interesting, isn't it? That's a journey for people in their own right. Once you stop treating a job as the primary source of your income, it allows for all sorts of possibilities. But a lot of people, I think, come to retirement not having thought that through, and so I think that's why it can be quite destabilizing. Sorry, Peter, I interrupted you. You were about to say something.
I was going to. I know you're going to be proud of me because I did do some research on this beforehand.
Well done, Peter.
Thank you. And I'm quoting UK stats here from our government here, and the reason people return is quite a significant number of people who do return to work after entering a state of retirement in some way. But I mean, the number one reason is money. I mean, a lot of people decide that there are financial challenges or whatever, something changes. So I think we have to accept that is the case. But very close second is social contact and enjoyment. Is the next one, with 46% of the people who retired and returned to work declaring that. Mental health improvement sits around 42%, and giving back is in the 30%. And obviously when people go back, they might mix that. You might say, I need a bit of money, but the social contact is great and it's helpful, it's good for my mental health, and I can give back. So it's kind of a combination of things. But it's a bigger community than perhaps I thought about in the past.
Isn't that amazing, Peter? As you were reading that out, I think I'm ticking every one of those boxes. It's with what I've just described, right? And I just want to, if I may, just go back to the money thing quickly, because it's it's an important topic for anyone. But it's interesting. I was out and about a couple of months ago, I think it was, and I met someone new in my community, and they said, what do you do? Usual question, what do you do for a living? And it's a difficult question to answer when you're in my position, because you're kind of retired, but you don't know if you are retired or if you're going to be retired forever or what. So I say, well, I'm currently, I consider myself to be retired, but I might go back to work at some point. And the question came back, you're not old enough to retire. Can you afford to retire? And that really got me thinking, because everyone's got a number, right? But the big issue is you don't know how long you're going to live for. That's the more serious question. If I live for the next 10 years, I can afford to retire. What if I live for another 50 years? Well, maybe not. And the serious question is, how long can you afford to live for? So even just amongst all those other things that you mentioned there, Peter, in that list, contact and community and all that kind of stuff. The money thing, it doesn't matter how much money it is. If you've got a little bit of money coming in, that can be quite a stress point for anyone that's retired. Is every time you go out and buy a loaf of bread or you buy a beer for your mates at the pub, that's coming out of your savings. Now, if you've got, it doesn't matter how much money you're being paid, but if you've got some money coming in, that can be a big stress reliever for anyone that's in a position where they consider themselves to be retired.
Yeah, I think this is a topic, Peter, we should cover, because
we should.
Has come up a couple of times, and I think it's very well said, Dean. And it's interesting, that question, just going back to what you said about what do you do, and it's a difficult question to answer. Actually, I've found it quite difficult for years. So for years now, when people ask me that, at a party or something like that, I say I'm a poet. And part of it's being a bit devilish. Part of it is because I do write a bit, and part of it's because I like to see people run away from me at that
point. and now you say you're a podcaster, right?
Well, there we go. Yeah, I think so. Dean, this has been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing your journey. I think it certainly resonates with me, and I'm sure it will with our listeners as well. And I think you've given us some other areas to go off and think about. We actually do have someone coming on in a couple of weeks' time, I think, Peter, to talk about the fact that they were immensely unprepared, even though they planned, which is really interesting. And I think this other thought about a small bit of income has a psychological sort of safety blanket associated with it, which was important to you, or you feel it might be important to you, and I'm sure it will be to other people. So thank you, Dean. Been really lovely to catch up with you again, and thanks for sharing all your insights.
I've thoroughly enjoyed it, and I hope it's of value to your listeners. But thank you for having me. It's been great.
Yeah, well, definitely is. Thanks a lot, Dean.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.
You have been listening to Walking into Retirement, an unusual podcast about finding purpose, meaning and balance after a busy working life with David Ailing Smith and Peter Taylor. Find out more at www.walkingintoretirement.com, and why not share your own retirement stories with the hosts?